It's Jeff from Ayelet Tours, and since 1986, we've been connecting people to Israel and the Jewish world. We are the official travel partners for Hadassah missions to Israel. We run tours all over the world under the banner of the Traveling University, featuring outstanding scholars such as Professor Stephen Berk. We run tours for Jewish singles and Jewish adults under the banner of Best Day Adventures. And we do the occasional virtual program. Thank you all for joining us this evening for this session 2 of Scholar-Palooza. So to keep with the Palooza theme, I guess, Professor Berk, you're our headliner on the main stage this evening. How's that?
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's nice to be back.
Always good to see you. Always great to have you back, and of course, this time on the outside of the paywall. So very exciting for, I'm sure, some people who might maybe have not joined our many virtual programs over these past several years. All right. A few things before we get going. Professor Berk's going to be speaking. Primarily, the topic we had listed tonight was Europe in crisis, Poland, Putin, and those sorts of things. But of course, there's a heck of a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot that has happened over the last few weeks, including the election, what's going on in Ukraine, and of course what's happening in Israel. And I have a feeling that Professor Berk is probably going to touch on a lot of these things this evening. So before we get going, a few house rules. A reminder, this is a webinar, not a Zoom meeting. You can see us. We cannot see you. That means you can sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. But we would love you to participate, and you can do so by using the Q&A function in the Zoom window. Post any questions you have there, and we will get to as many of them as possible. Yes, this is a recorded session. For those of you that were with us last week with Dr. David Mendelson talking about Greece, it was an excellent session. But if you missed it, we actually have it posted on our Ayelet Tours YouTube page. So that is publicly available. You can go and find that on YouTube. Just search for Ayelet Tours and you'll find it there. Feel free to pass it on, share it. That is a program that is open to everyone, as will this one be as well. Okay, when we get to the break, we'll talk about some of the amazing things we have coming up in terms of tours. But for now, because we've got a lot to cover this evening, for this evening's presentation, Scholar-Palooza Session 2, I will turn it over to you, Professor Stephen Berk.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure again to be back. For those of you who are here with me for the first time, I thank you for joining. For those of you that have been with me over the years on our various programs, I'm grateful that you're tuning in once again. President-elect Trump has a full plate in front of him. Whether you voted for him or not, I'll use the old language, you have to have Rachmanis for him or for anybody who would become president of the United States. I'm going to play the piano here. By that I mean I'm going to go really all over the globe. And I start with the KGB man. He's riding high. Vladimir Putin is doing very, very well. Russia is on the offensive. The Russians are grabbing more territory in Ukraine. He has militarized Russian society. He has factories that are working 24 hours a day. And of course, it is something that we did not count on. We thought our sanctions would break him, or at the very, very least, would force him to withdraw from Ukraine or to agree to a negotiated peace on favorable terms for Ukraine. What we did not count on is his ability to rally his support. Just as President Biden did a very good job in rallying support from European countries in behalf of supporting Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has done a very good job in getting support from North Korea, from China, and from Iran. Let's begin at the beginning here. Some of you have heard this before, but some of you remember my second grade teacher, Mrs. Grossman, also told me, always said to the class, repetition is the mother of learning. So you forgive me. The most important thing to know about Vladimir Putin is that he was a representative, he was an agent in the KGB. The KGB trained its people, inculcated in its personnel, men and women, what the Germans would call a Weltanschauung, a worldview. I'll go through this very, very quickly. Item number one in the worldview of a KGB agent is the United States is the greatest enemy that Russia, the Soviet Union, and Russia today has ever faced. Nothing is as great a problem in the modern period as is the United States. Every bad thing that has befallen Russia and the Soviet Union in the 20th century, according to Putin and according to many people in Russia, can be laid at the doorsteps of the United States. So the United States is the ultimate enemy of the Russian people and of the Russian state. In addition to that, he is a man that has been trained to find weakness. A good KGB agent always searches for weakness. And when you find the weakness in an individual or you find the weakness in a country, you drive a locomotive right through it. That's what Putin has done. He has intervened in American elections. It is a matter of debate, certainly in political science classes, as how effective that intervention has been. Is he really responsible for Hillary Clinton's defeat in 2016? I doubt it, but people can talk about it. There can be no illusion, however, he did intervene. And the weakness that he perceived in the American society is one that continues down to the present day. Our unfettered social media. You can put anything out there on the computer. Anything you want, you can put out there. And there are enough gullible people who will believe what you have to say. So, he is also a man that has come under the influence of someone who is considered to be Russia's leading geopolitician. That is the leading theoretician of geopolitics in the Russian state. That's a man by the name of Alexander Dulgin. And Dulgin has said, he is very close to Putin, he has said that Russia was the greatest nation in Europe, one of the greatest nations on the planet, and that Russia can only be great again if it recovers the territories that were lost when the Soviet Union disintegrated. And that in particular, it means Ukraine. Ukraine, the grain basket, loaded with iron, loaded with coal. Ukraine has to be brought into the Russian sphere, into the Russian state, certainly in the Russian sphere of influence. So these are the things these are the beliefs that he has. That's the Weltanschauung that he has. He also is a believer, and from his point of view, he is correct. An independent and prosperous, a democratic and prosperous Ukraine is a danger to him, to his autocratic rule of Russia. That is, to give you the analogy, some of you may have heard this before from me, the analogy is with East Berlin and West Berlin, East Germany and West Germany. What undermined communist rule in the eastern part of Germany was the prosperity and democracy of West Berlin and West Germany. A prosperous Ukraine is an indictment of the difficult economic situation within Russia. In Russia, it is always the tension between the refrigerator and the TV. The Russian watches, a Russian man, or there can be a Russian woman, it doesn't make any difference. The Russian man looks at the television and sees, because Putin controls the media, he sees a string of reports indicating how successful the Russian army has been in Ukraine. And he is absolutely delighted. He then turns to his wife and says, I want a snack, and opens the refrigerator, and there's almost nothing there. That is, the sanctions have hit hard. So what Putin has to do, is to play to the nationalist spirit, the national consciousness of the Russian people. And so, again, a prosperous Ukraine, a democratic Ukraine, is an indictment of the way that he rules Russia. In addition to that, every Russian theoretician, forget about Dulgin for the moment, going back to the period of the Tsars, Russia never tolerated let's say, a potentially unfriendly government with a contiguous border with Russia. That is, the Russians do not like people or enemy countries coming very close to them. Now, again, I don't want to spin this out more than it really is. In the 1990s, there was a great debate in the United States. Should we incorporate Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia and ultimately Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, the Baltic states? Should we integrate them into NATO? Russian specialists said, don't do it. Do not do it. This will make Russia very, very defensive, and he will try to weaken that in one way or another. But East European specialists argued that it was a moral issue for us. That is, we were unable in the 20th century, and really for years before, the democracies in the world were not able to defend the Poles, the Czechs, and the Slovaks, and the Hungarians, and the people of the Baltic states. We could not defend them against oppression, either coming from Russia in the east or Germany from the west. This was the ultimate guarantee. Bring them into NATO, and indeed we can protect them and guarantee their survival. Be that as it may, Putin decided, I've given you some of the reasons, Putin decided that it was necessary for him, whether it was a matter of theory, ideology, security, that's a matter of debate, but there is no question that he felt he had to go into Ukraine. And he also, the added factor here is the bad intelligence that he received from his intelligence operations. That is, every evidence we have, every piece of evidence, indicates that Mr. Putin believed it's going to be a piece of cake. I can take Kiev in 3 days, he thought. He did not count on the resilience of the Ukrainian people, did not count on that issue of personality and history that some of you have heard me dwell on almost ad nauseum, and that is personality counts. And how could he know that there would be a man like Zelensky, and that Zelensky would be that charismatic leader, a man who is very, very gifted in terms of his ability to articulate things, or again, every analogy is flawed. I always said this to you, I've said this to you before, and that is Zelensky is to Ukraine in the 2020s as Churchill was to England in 1940 and 1941. That is, he has steeled the backbone of the Ukrainian people, and he's made it. He's worth probably 10 divisions of Ukrainian soldiers. And apropos of the Ukrainian divisions, there is a problem here, and I'm not sure why the Ukrainians do what they do. Ukraine is the only country in the world, to the best of my knowledge, that does not conscript 18 and 19-year-old boys. They don't do it. Ukraine does not conscript young men under the age of 25. That's a terrible mistake. It's easy for me to say. I don't know what went into Ukrainian thinking. They probably thought there would be a massive emigration of young men if they did this. But the fact of the matter is, Ukraine is always screaming that there's a manpower shortage. Israel is a country of 7 million people. 7 million people, and it's 7 million Jews. 10 million people, 7 million Jews. It's the 7 million Jews that bear the burden of the fighting. In the crunch, God forbid, Israel could probably throw into battle 750,000, if not 800,000 men and women. That's on a Jewish population in Israel of 7 million. The Ukraine has a population of 46 million. The Ukrainians should be able to mobilize more men. But whatever the reason may be, the Russians are winning. The Russians are really no great offensive, no great breakthroughs, but the Russians just keep coming. I think I mentioned to you, some of you before, what Henry Kissinger said about Russia is true. What he said about the Soviet Union is true of Russia today. What the Russians lack in intelligence, they make up in persistence. The Russians just keep coming. And given the population disparity, Russia has a population of about 140 million people, Ukraine has a population of about 46 million people, and Putin is not like all Russian leaders. In the Second World War, Stalin was prepared to sacrifice enormous numbers of soldiers in order to gain ground. And that's what Putin is doing. We are talking probably about 600,000 casualties, if not more, and maybe as many as 150,000 to 200,000 Russian dead. He doesn't seem to be bothered by this. And now that he is getting 10,000 Korean soldiers, now the North Korean soldiers are going to fight, and they're going to fight well. They're probably getting better food in Russia than they could possibly get in North Korea. North Korea is a marginal society, ruled by a real fruitcake, if there ever was one. And again, he has put the country on near starvation rations. This is a chance for North Korean soldiers to see another part of the world, probably get more pay for probably whether they're volunteering or not, I do not know. But I think they'll probably be enthusiastic about what they're doing. And that leads us to something else. And that is, again, there have been some articles, it was in the Times, the Wall Street Journal, and some of the more specialized publications. It pays to die. For a Russian soldier, it pays to die. First of all, he's getting probably about $2,500 a month. That's an enormous salary for anybody in Russia. And his families will get a good payoff. So there are whole regions of Russia that have benefited from this war. They bury their sons in cemeteries, but then they build a dacha. So the point here is, he's not doing badly, Putin. Our hopes that somehow there would be an upsurge from the Russian people, or that the losses would be too great, he would be forced to withdraw or to wind down the war, has not come to be. And then the last issue here is the one that has been introduced by President Biden. Historians will debate this, and hopefully it will not lead to terrible consequences. Zelensky has begged Biden and the West Europeans, the people in NATO, to take or to allow them to use the weapons that are provided to Ukraine and use them not only in Ukrainian battlefields, but to strike deep into Russia. That's an escalation. Why did President Biden do this? I'm not altogether sure. It's a risky thing. And President Putin, I believe today, said that countries that provided weapons that can attack Russia, they may find themselves attacked by Russia. This is really dangerous stuff. I'm not saying it was the wrong thing for President Biden to do, but it is a risky thing. If you want to put a positive spin on this, this may be President Biden's gift to President-elect Trump, because Trump can use the escalation as a bargaining chip in dealing with Putin. Again, I'm a historian. I'm not a prophet. I'm lucky if I get the history right. If I get the history right, I'm doing well. To predict what's going to happen in the future, one has to be very, very careful. Then let me move a little bit further away from Russia and go into Western Europe, into NATO itself. What is taking place now is what Putin thought would happen much earlier. And that is, there are now people in Western Europe, the Germans, for example. The Germans always wary, first of all, of getting involved in this war in Ukraine. There are two reasons for that. Believe it or not, there's a lot of guilt in Germany. Not only guilt over the Holocaust, but guilt over the German invasion on June 22nd, what is known as 1941, what is known as Operation Barbarossa, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. 27 million citizens of the Soviet Union died in the Second World War. The prospect of German tanks being used against Russian forces makes us, a number of Germans, a little queasy. To be more cynical or more pragmatic, the Germans have a good deal of investment in Russia. The Germans use Russia or have Russia as a major trading partner. There's a lot of money to be made, and the Germans don't want to risk that. France is holding firm. President Macron, whatever he may be talk about privately with other world leaders, he is still saying that we're going to support the Ukraine, and he's not talking about negotiations. But the idea of negotiations, which was a taboo topic early on in the Ukrainian war, and Zelensky has never talked about negotiations. He talks about negotiations, but he talks about negotiations, the bottom line for which has to be that Ukraine will recover all of the land that it lost. So Macron is holding firm. The Italians are holding firm. The Germans, who are the industrial powerhouse of Europe, are not. And even in France and Italy, there are people who are just simply tired of shoving a lot of money into Ukraine. Unless you're absolutely oblivious, and I'm not being condescending here, you know that this is an issue in our own country as well, with a growing number of people, again, some saying it publicly, most are not saying it, most are saying it privately. It is time to negotiate. My own feeling is this is a call primarily by Zelensky, but what our position should be, at least, again, I don't have a monopoly on the truth here, what our position should be is we should arm Ukraine to the teeth. That is, we ought to talk privately to the Ukrainians about negotiations, but by providing strong and effective weapons to Ukraine, we strengthen their negotiating position when the inevitable negotiations will take place. I spoke recently before a Ukrainian group. I speak before Ukrainian groups and people who support Ukraine, and I tell them we've got to support Ukraine. We've got to do it for a number of reasons. First of all, the Russian invasion was immoral. This is an unprovoked aggression. And you always worry about the precedent that will be set. The man who you have to watch here, the man who's going to learn the lesson of Ukraine, this war in Ukraine, is President Xi of China. We'll talk about that somewhat later. So here we are, people are talking about negotiations, and then there's another problem. Now, hang in there with me. You're not going to like what I have to say, even though I'm not going to give you a specific recommendation. I don't know the answer to this myself. What's happening in Europe, in Amsterdam, in Paris, and in Brussels, is that the Europeans are paying the price. Or let us say, they're enduring the consequences of large-scale Muslim immigration into their countries. Every group of immigrants, including Jewish immigrants to any country, bring with them the intellectual, the political, and the religious baggage that from whence they come. And when it comes to Muslim immigrants from the Middle East, that baggage includes anti-Semitism, ferocious hostility to Jews, and to the state of Israel. What happened in Amsterdam is not aberrational. And what happened in Paris is not aberrational. This is a problem for the Jewish communities in these countries. The chief rabbi of France says it's all over for French Jews, and he has urged them to emigrate. I'm not a specialist in French politics or in French society, in French history, but that's a scary thing. Now, here's where things become provocative. When President-elect Trump was president in 2016, he put an immigration barrier on people coming from the Islamic world, particularly from the Muslim Middle East. Many of us, including myself, were outraged. I suspect that among all of you who are watching this program, there probably aren't more than 5 that can trace their antecedents in this country back before 1881. That's when the massive wave of East European immigrants came. We are all the children and grandchildren of immigrants. How can we oppose immigration? And how can we oppose immigration or have immigration restrictions based upon race and religion and things like that? That's what doomed our people. That's what happened in Johnson-Reed, the Immigration Act in 1924. That wasn't aimed at, well, it was aimed at Jews, but there was no Jewish exclusion clause. It was limiting the number of people that came from Eastern Europe. So how can we support an idea of limiting immigration or limiting immigration of people coming from the Islamic world? On the other hand, nobody has a license, no community has a license to commit suicide. If more Muslim immigrants come into our country, are we going to see a replay of Amsterdam and Paris? I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know. And I'm not making a specific recommendation. But I'm saying it is a very, very difficult issue. Don't shove it under the rug. Now, the argument, of course, is that this is a melting pot, and all people who come in, they melt in and they all become Americans. We know that that is not exactly true. But we know for the most part, really, it is somewhat of a melting pot. My favorite American politician was Mayor Koch of New York. I really thought he was the greatest. And here's an incident. It tells a lot. It was a Ukrainian Day parade in New York City. It happened under 15, 20 years, 25 years ago. And who's leading the Ukrainian Day parade? Mayor Koch. The parade is going down Fifth Avenue. It's Mayor Koch. And a snotty reporter, a young kid, asked the mayor, "Hey, Mr. Mayor, what do you think about this Ukrainian Day parade and you're leading it?" And Koch summed it up very well. America is a wonderful place. In the old country, these Ukrainians would be chasing me down the street and there would be a pogrom against the Jews. But in America, people take on a new face. People look at things differently. Is that true of Muslim immigrants coming from the Middle East? Is that true? I track the imams, the Muslim leaders, the clerics. I do it through a website that you should go to. Capital M, capital E, capital M, capital R, capital I. That's a translation service that translates from Arabic and Farsi from what is being said in the Islamic world and what is being said in the Islamic communities in the United States. It would chill the socks off of you if you saw what some of the imams in some of the major American cities are saying. The Zionists are like dogs. You got to throw them out. They're talking about many of us. They say that we have no place in the universities. We have no place anywhere else. I'm raising the issue with you. I have no answer. It runs to talk about limiting immigration and doing it on the basis of religious affinity offends every one of our sensibilities. But again, no community has the right to commit suicide. What are we looking at? I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot tell what the future is going to be. But this is an issue to think about. I don't mean to provoke you. I don't mean to upset any of you. My job, or the job of any scholar, is to raise issues, sometimes to give definitive answers if he or she can do it, and on other occasions, and I can't give you an answer here, my students accuse me of a multitude of sins. Waffling is never one of them. This is not a waffle. I don't know the answer to this question. Then we move into the Middle East. The Middle East, a quagmire, if there ever was one. Specifically, it is, again, the Israeli war in Gaza, the Israeli war in Lebanon. What are we to do here? What is Israel to do here? What should be the American response here? President Biden, for the most part, has been a magnificent supporter of the state of Israel. But there are differences in interests. We want stability in the Middle East. The Israelis want to survive. They see survival, whether they're right or wrong. Who are we to say to them? But the Israelis believe that unless Hamas is completely destroyed, can you completely destroy Hamas? I don't know if you can. The Israelis believe that unless Hamas is destroyed, there'll be a repetition of October 7th. Now, Hamas already has said, representatives have said, there's going to be October 7th, after October 7th, after October 7th. So what do? How long do you fight? How long do you put these hostages at risk? I suspect that many of them are dead. I can't say most. I don't know the answer to that. But what do? How much do you sacrifice of the national interest for the sake of the hostages? I don't know the answer to this. I'm just raising the questions with you. And I would suggest to you, for those of you out there who are supporting the state of Israel, I'm going to give you a statement that does not rank with Torah mi Sinai. I'm not an egomaniac. There's nothing that I can say that ranks with anything that's said in the Torah. Nonetheless, I will say to you, this is an axiom I drum into myself and to my students and people who listen to my lectures. Never forget, we American Jews and supporters of Israel, we are here and they are there. Your children don't have to go on school buses really guarded by people who use submachine guns. Are the areas in which we live, usually upper middle class areas, very, very nice areas, are not under rocket attack? You've got to be very careful in dealing with the Israel and telling the Israelis what they should do and what they should not do. It's very easy to do it from the safety of our homes, the security of our schools, wherever you may be, and to tell the Israelis you do A, B, and C. When our children are going into Gaza or going into southern Lebanon, then you have the right to say something. So the point here is, I don't know what's right. It's an Israeli call, not an American Jewish call, and not even an American governmental call. I don't care how much money the United States gives to Israel. There are some people out there who will say, some of my friends, we're giving us all this money. We have a right to dictate their foreign policy and their military policy. Not on your life. The money that is given serves American interests as well as Israeli interests. That is, anything that weakens Islamic extremism is good not only for us, not only for Israel, but for us ourselves. Witness 9/11. So the point here again is, I don't know what's right, but I'm telling you, the new president, President-elect Trump, is going to have to deal with this. As far as, remember, what's the adage? A picture is worth 1,000 words. The fact of the matter is, Israel's international prestige is precipitously gone down. After all, look at the thousands. Now we're talking about 43,000 men, women, and children killed. Remember, can you trust the Palestinian figures? I don't know. And the Palestinians do not make any distinction between combat soldiers for Hamas and civilians. But there's no question. If you've got a sensitive bone in your body, you got to grieve for these people. My own personal view is that every death in Gaza can be laid at the doorsteps of Hamas. Hamas began the attack. Israel did what any country would have done. And again, all of this could come to an end. I don't care what Netanyahu wants. If Hamas said today, I'm going to release all of the hostages and you got to get out of Gaza, there is no way in the world that Netanyahu would stand up against the Israeli public on this issue. So the war could come to an end. And the same thing in southern Lebanon. Southern Lebanon presents a very serious problem to Zionism as an idea. As you all know, you must have heard it since you were children. Israel is the size of New Jersey. It's a small country. The Zionist idea was that the Jewish people would have a land of their own and could live in safety and security. How can an Israeli government allow a situation to exist where the northern part of the country cannot be inhabited and over 60,000 Israelis have been forced to leave? It is Hezbollah that started it after October 7th. Everybody seems to forget this. Hezbollah started it. Israel had to respond. A country cannot allow a certain part of the country to be uninhabitable. It cannot do it. Certainly a country that, as its raison d'etre, its reason for being, the security and the safety of the Jewish people. How could it not invade southern Lebanon? How could it not really try to stop the rockets coming from Hezbollah? So again, I don't know what the answer is, but once again, the issue could be very quickly resolved if Hezbollah agreed to the fact that we won't shoot rockets against you. You don't get out of southern Lebanon. And the problem here is, as it would be in Gaza. My own solution for Gaza, and indeed for Lebanon, is not the UN. The UN has proved to be a bankrupt institution. What we need are NATO forces in Gaza and in southern Lebanon. Under Resolution 1701, UN forces in southern Lebanon were supposed to disarm Hezbollah. They never did it. So don't count on the UN. It's a NATO force, minus the Turks and minus the Irish. Ireland is one of the most anti-Israeli countries within the world. Ireland is a tough place for Jews. That is, some of the anti-Zionism moves over into anti-Semitism. You don't want Irish soldiers there, and you sure as hell don't want Turkish soldiers there, because President Erdogan is a virulent anti-Semite. But there are other NATO soldiers that could be in there. They could make sure that Hamas, even if you have a remedy, Israelis pull out, that Hamas does not act in a terrible way again. And they can guarantee the security of northern Israel by having NATO forces stationed in southern Lebanon. Whether that will be, I don't know. The one thing I do know is I don't want American soldiers there. We should never agree. Our government should, whoever runs the government, Republicans or Democrats, we should never agree to stationing American soldiers in southern Lebanon or Gaza. All we need with rising anti-Semitism is for a number of American soldiers to die and a number of those yolks in American society, both on the left and on the right, will argue that American soldiers are dying for the Jews. We don't want that. Then I move to Iran. Iran presents the really only existential threat that Israel confronts. Not Hamas, not Hezbollah, not Islamic Jihad. But the issue really is Iran. And the reason I'm saying this is Iran is on the verge of building a nuclear weapon. To attack or not to attack? That's what President-elect Trump is going to have to deal with. I happen to believe that there should be either an Israeli or an American attack upon Iran. Iran is hell-bent on destroying the state of Israel. If it has a nuclear weapon, as President Rafsanjani, a former president of Iran, said, he was quizzed by students at the University of Tehran. Why are we spending so much money trying to have a nuclear arsenal? The Israelis have a nuclear arsenal. We can't attack them because they will attack us. So why are we wasting our time doing this? The money could be better spent in other places. You know what Rafsanjani said? Or he's reputed to have said, you're right. The Israelis have nuclear weapons. We have nuclear weapons. But if there's a nuclear exchange, when the smoke clears We will be here and they will not be. He's right. 120 kiloton weapon over Tel Aviv, and Israel ceases to exist as a viable state. And I am not exaggerating when I say the antipathy that is felt by the Ayatollahs, both Ayatollah Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei, towards Israel. There's no exaggeration there. They believe that Israel is a cancer, a malignancy that has to be wiped off the face of the earth. There's a digital clock in Tehran that counts down from the year 2040, because according to the Iranian government, sometime between now and 2040, Israel will be destroyed. Diplomacy is always better than war. Always. But what do you do? Can you trust any diplomatic agreement with Iran? Iran is a renegade state. What do you do with Iran? I am worried. For the first time in my life, I'm worried about the survival of the state of Israel because of Iran. And from the American interest, Iran is a problem. Today, Iran has ballistic missiles that can travel 2,500 miles. Within less than 5 years, they will have ballistic missiles that can go 5,000 miles. They can reach the United States. My own feeling is, but again, the caveat is, I don't have a monopoly on the truth. My own feeling is that the Iranians have to be taken out. And if the United States is not prepared to do it, then the United States should give Israel. Israel is the country that's under the gun here. Remember, we're the big Satan. Israel is the little Satan, according to the Iranians. But the Iranians don't talk about wiping out the United States. They don't talk about wiping out France. They talk about wiping out the state of Israel. Israel is the only country in the world that is targeted for destruction by another country. One ought not to forget this. And then I go to the bottom line of the Middle East. You listen to all the pundits on television and the radio. They say how complicated this is. Now, some of it is complicated. But underneath it all, there's a very simple fact of life. The troubles in the Middle East, whether it's with Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, whatever it may be, in dealing with Israel, the underlying problem is that from the get-go, back in the 1920s, the overwhelming majority of the Islamic world did not believe that the Jewish people have a right to even a truncated state in part of Palestine. That's a somewhat elegant way of saying that the Arabs and other Muslims throughout the world do not believe that the Jews have a right to a state, even in a very small part of Palestine. That goes back to the 20s, that goes back to the 30s. In that period of time, the most moderate people within the Islamic world were saying, yes, the Jews can stay. Those who are here can stay. We don't want any further immigration. And they will be given maybe some autonomy within a greater Arab state. But once again, for the third time, the idea that the Jews have a place, have a right to a place in Palestine, to an independent and sovereign Jewish state, is not accepted down to the present day, I suspect, by the overwhelming majority of Muslims in this world. Yes, Israel has peace with Jordan, and it has peace with Egypt. That is good. That's a very, very good thing. And the Abrahamic Accords are a very good thing. But this is the coldest of pieces with Egypt and Jordan. Heaven help an Egyptian doctor who comes to a medical conference in Israel. If he's lucky, he'll be blacklisted. If he's unlucky, he'll be killed. The same thing in Jordan. Heaven help a Jordan journalist who came to interview Israelis in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa. He's lucky to get back alive. He'll get back alive out of Israel, but he's lucky to stay alive within Jordan. Again, a cold peace is better than a hot war. There's no question of that. No question of that. Better to have the peace. And the peace is held since 1979, since the time of the Camp David Accords. But again, keep in mind, it's a cold peace. So here we are. One last point before I open to the whole argument for questions. And that is, watch China. China is a major issue for the United States. And President Trump and your children, and our grandchildren, are going to have to wrestle with China. China is pursuing an aggressive position, a very, very aggressive position. And I don't mean to scare the socks out of you, President Xi has said publicly that 2027 is the year of decision. What he's talking about, of course, is Taiwan. What he is implying is that there either is a diplomatic settlement about Taiwan or China will invade Taiwan. That's what he's talking about. And some of you may have seen pictures in the American newspapers of the new stealth bomber that the Chinese have developed. He says 2027 because the Chinese do not have the naval capacity to cross the straits. They cannot launch. Our Navy is superior to them, both in numbers of ships and in the quality of the ships and the quality of our seamanship. But that's now. That's 2024. What will be the situation in 2027? The answer is, I simply do not know. What I'm telling you, my friends, it's a very dangerous world out there. We live in a world that is inhabited by sharks. That is on the other side, so-called axis of resistance here. These are countries, North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, that do not want to play by the rules of the post-World War II order. Rules which ruled out aggression, that said aggression by one country against another was not right, that democracy was not the way to go, that negotiations were the way to resolve issues, and a movement in the direction of disarmament. And of course, one presided over by the United States. That axis of resistance is very much opposed to everything that has been created by the United States and the European countries, the democratic countries of Europe, since the Second World War. Again, this is a very, very dangerous time for us. And I speak as an American, not only as a Jewish American, but as an American. I don't know what the future is going to bring. I don't know how President Trump is going to react to all of these problems. Will he attack Iran? Will he give the Israelis those 30-ton Buster bombs that the Israelis do not have, that can penetrate the nuclear institution, nuclear infrastructure of Iran? I don't know the answer to that. Will the Israelis act in their own defense? I don't know. I don't know. I hope there will be a negotiated settlement. And I think here President Trump is correct. He is the only world leader, that has spoken publicly, really publicly, about the need for negotiations. When I spoke before the Ukrainian audiences, and when I spoke to them about the possibility of negotiations, they were infuriated, absolutely infuriated. But there has to be negotiations. Will he further those negotiations? I don't know the answer to that. And for the Europeans, Europe may need, NATO may need some tough love from the United States, and it may be long overdue. The Europeans believe in soft power. That is the beauty, the strength of their economies, the beauty of their political systems, and so on. They think that they can be a magnet for the rest of the world. They should have read Mao Zedong. You know what Mao used to say about political power? It flows from the barrel of a gun. If you don't have the power, and you don't create the impression that you're willing to use that power, all the soft power in the world, all your economic strength, all of the beauty of your political institutions, they will count for nothing. To put it another way, sometimes it is said, we are strong because we are free. That is, a free country, the people are willing to fight for their vested interests into it. But again, I suggest to you, make no mistake about this. We are free because we are strong. That we have always had the military capacity to defend ourselves and advance our interests and save the interests of, really, support the interests of other countries. The United States saved the world twice in the 20th century. We helped save the world in World War II. It's American industrial power that provided the support, the food and the support, as well as the manpower, to overthrow Nazism and Japanese imperialism. We were in the forefront of saving the world during the Cold War. We were the ultimate barrier to the Soviet Union expanding in Europe and presenting a threat to the United States? Do we have the will, the wherewithal, the leadership, the capability to defend our interests, the interests of our allied friend, of our friends? Do we have the interest? What do we have to do to guarantee those interests continue to exist? How do we sustain our power, sustain our capacity? These are the questions of the immediate future and the questions of the long run. So, my friends, I've thrown out a number of things to you. For the third time in this lecture, I tell you, I do not have a monopoly on the truth. I'm not the prophet from Union College, not the prophet from upstate New York that knows every way to resolve these issues. I do not know. We are a democratic country. Everybody has the right to speak. And I invite you to raise all of the questions that you want. And I will do the best of my ability to answer them. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. Jeffrey, it's all yours.
Professor Berk, wow, did we cover a lot this evening? So I can imagine the questions are going to be coming in fast and furious. We will get to as many of them as we can. Before we do that, Hanukkah's coming in a few weeks. Maybe, I don't know what the equivalent to a stocking stuffer would be, like a dreidel stuffer. Maybe people could consider, they should know that you have been giving these virtual programs for many years. We've been doing them together. They are available for purchase. Maybe they have a kid or a grandkid who might benefit from the incredible programs that you have put out with us over the years. So just something to put out there. And before we get to all of these questions, I got to ask you, Professor Berk, you said in part of your summary, you said it's a dangerous world out there. We are, of course, we've got a vested interest in people going and exploring and traveling the world as a travel company. What would be your best case for why people should still go and travel, even with all of these difficult and challenging things going on in the world right now?
We do not believe in isolationism. We believe that the best interests of our country are best served by having relationships with other countries. It's important to travel, to learn what other people are thinking. When you go to a place like Germany, you go to a place like France, they think they have different points of view on here. But it is important for us to understand them as it is important for them to understand us. You travel, you learn. It's as simply as that. That's what we call it the traveling university. And I must tell you, I'm a historian. Again, you can look at it in a different way. For me, there is nothing like standing in a place where history took place. In the old days, we would go to Russia. And when this damn war is over, we'll go to Russia again. You stand in Revolutionary Square. You stand in front of the place where the Bolsheviks took power. You stand in the place where all sorts of things took place. You can even go to the Peter and Paul Fortress. Now, the Russian guides will take you around. They'll show you where the Tsars are buried there. Who cares about that, right? We don't care about that. They'll show you where Russian revolutionaries were imprisoned. Do you know, this they won't tell you, that the first Lubavitcher Rebbe was imprisoned there in the Peter and Paul Fortress? That's an interesting story, more than you ever wanted to know, because in that period of time, there was an internal conflict within the Jewish community, a civil war. Not a violent civil war, but a civil war between the Hasidim and their opponents, the Misnagdim. In the eyes of these were the Orthodox that didn't buy into the Hasidic movement. These are people that thought the Hasidim were dancing, they were drinking alcohol, all that kind of stuff. Whether it's true or not, who knows? But they actually prohibited. Hasidic Rebbes prohibited intermarriage between their people and people in the Misnagdim, who were Orthodox Jews too. And the Orthodox rabbis among the Misnagdim wouldn't allow their people to marry into the Hasidic families. And the story goes that somebody didn't like the Hasidic Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They made up a story about him to the Tsarist secret police, and there he ends up. To this day, the day that he was liberated is a feast day in the Hasidic movement. So the point here is, you travel, you learn. And I must tell you, some of you have heard this before. I tell it wherever I go. Every Jew, once in his or her life, should go to Jerusalem. You got to stand at the wall. You got to travel the country. Do you realize how privileged you and I are? We are the first Jewish generations to live simultaneously with the first sovereign Jewish state in 2,000 years. So every Jew should go to Jerusalem. Every American, Jew or Gentile, black or white, should go to Omaha Beach. And when you go up and you see that beautiful cemetery with a wave of crosses and the occasional Jewish star, you know what the price for freedom is. And then every human being should go, as we go, every time we go to Eastern Europe, we go to Auschwitz. Every human being should see the failure to have a moral bottom that the Nazis had. And also when we learn about Auschwitz, we learn about incredible bravery, incredible altruism, incredible resilience. So, my friends, in answer to your question, Jeffrey, to learn and to feel, that's why we travel.
Beautifully said. And with that, we've got to bring up, of course, that we have several travel opportunities with you coming up this year in 2025. First and foremost, as you were just talking about, that everyone in the world should do at least once. We do have your grand finale Eastern European trip this coming June. If you've never traveled to Eastern Europe with Professor Berk, I highly suggest you consider this. All the information, of course, is on our website. That is coming up at the end of June 2025. We just recently sent out about the Presidential Libraries trip that we have going to Texas in July. All the information about that is on our website, of course. That's already filling very quickly just from the announcement a couple days ago. So if you're interested, this is the follow-up. Presidential Libraries #2, having sold it out last summer. So another opportunity to travel with Professor Berk. And finally, Professor Berk will be in Cuba in a couple of weeks. And we have on the calendar for 2025 in December as well. Professor Berk will be back in Cuba. It's a wonderful opportunity not only to learn Cuban history, Jewish history in Cuba, but also go in person and support the Cuban people, the Jewish communities of Cuba, which are isolated. You can't ship stuff there. You really have to bring it. And so the groups that we send there bring incredible amounts of supplies, needed supplies, medical and otherwise, to support the Cuban community. So you can check out all that and so much more on our website, ayelet.com. Lots to look forward to in the year ahead. We've got lots of questions that have already come in, so let's get rolling here. You want to start controversial or no, we won't go there yet. You raised some great stuff.
Go wherever you want to go.
You raised some great stuff today, Professor Berk. So we will be all over the place. Rosa Borg writes in, what would be the best course for the European Union to take with regards to Russia and Ukraine? I second what Professor Berk said about what is good for Israel in their fight against evil, also being good for the rest of us in Europe and America. Thank you for making this webinar available. You're welcome, Rosa. But the question really is, for the European Union, what is their best course of action with Russia and Ukraine?
The best course of action is to continue the course of action. And that is to continue supplying Ukraine with the weapons that it needs to defend itself. And maybe, if they're a little bit lucky, and who knows what the future can bring, that is to go on the offensive. At the very least, continuing to supply Ukraine does two things. One, it strengthens the Ukrainian negotiating position. That's number one. And number two, as I implied, or I didn't hint, I actually spoke about this. The one that you have to worry about is not Putin. People say, if you don't really support Ukraine, Putin will push into the rest of Europe. That's not true. Stupid he's not. He's not going to attack a NATO country because that may trigger a world war. He's not going to do that. What he's going to do is he's probably going to do one of two things, or maybe both. Because of Stalin's policies in the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, there are large numbers of Russians living in those countries. He will attempt to destabilize them. He won't occupy them. He won't invade them. because they're part of NATO. But he'll foment insurrections, blow up things, have people, again, spies coming in, espionage people. That is, the people who will have support from the Russian populations there. Up until recently, unless the figures have changed, in a country like Estonia and Latvia, in Lithuania, 25% of the population is Russian. Stalin moved them in. In Estonia and Latvia, the percentages are even higher. And then the other place where he's going to cause trouble is going to be in the stands, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, where there are large numbers of Russians living there. So that's what he's going to do. He is also trying to, of course, break up NATO, and we've got to defend NATO. So, but I must tell you, there's got to be a little tough love here. We have, even President Eisenhower, over 50 years ago, 60 years ago, took the Europeans and NATO to task. They weren't paying their full share. You know, President Trump has said that, but he's been very, very abrasive in saying that, very sharp and aggressive in saying that. But that's not a new policy. It's time that the Europeans step up. It's time that the Europeans created a European army and to project real military power and force rather than relying upon soft power. So the direct answer to your question is we should continue, of course, to support NATO, and the Europeans have to step up to the plate. They're the ones, this is in their ballpark, not in our ballpark.
All right, let's stick with Europe for a bit here. Randall Barron writes in, do you think that the Germans will ultimately be able to create a policy to protect themselves and continue to support Israel? And I'm just curious, we'll add on to that one other thing. You were talking a little bit about maybe their mixed incentives for supporting Ukraine. And I'm just curious with the Nord Stream pipeline, there was a sabotage on the Nord Stream pipeline. God, when was that? Last year? It seems to point at this point to that the Ukrainians did it. I'm curious if that's your feeling or if you feel that somebody else did it.
I think the Ukrainians did it. I think but again, got to be careful with these things. We don't know definitively here. So we can say, I think the Ukrainians did it. This is a way to hurt Russia because of the income that it would get through the sale of oil and natural gas. And it may have been a warning to the Germans. You got to really shape up here. But Germany is in a very difficult situation now. Right-wing elements, really, in fact, fascist, neo-Nazi elements in Germany are rising in strength. And the argument, it's anti-immigration thinking, too much money is spent in dealing with fighting in Ukraine and so on. So the Germans will be able to defend themselves. And remember, they're part of NATO. Will they continue to defend the state of Israel? To show you, again, an axiom of history. History is fluid. It's not stagnant. I'll give you two examples here. Who would have believed that Germany is the second most important ally that Israel has? I mean, this is the country that killed 6 million Jews. Who would have believed it? It's a wonderful democracy. It's a great democratic state. And the submarines that Israel has, the PT boats or the patrol boats, they all come from Germany. Not from Britain, not from France. So, again, this is one of those astonishing things in history. History is fluid. It's not stagnant. And the other thing, of course, that doesn't play into this is, remember, Imperial Japan. Japan is now a democratic state. One of the world's great democracies. And really striking to home, as we begin to form defensive alliances against Chinese aggression and Chinese overreach, who do we find as an important American ally? Not only Japan, Vietnam. 55,000 American soldiers died in Vietnam. Now Vietnam is an essential element in the American anchor defending against against Chinese aggression. So, again, history is always in flux. So I think the Germans for some time to come will defend the state of Israel. Yes, they will. It is the very reason for existence, as a number of people have said in Germany. You got to defend it. After what we did to the Jews, we've got to always defend the state of Israel. But remember, history changes and there are new generations. As I tell people, you know, Union is a wonderful place. It's a beautiful college campus. And, you know, the kids are good. They really are. The faculty a little bit too far to the left for me, but they're decent people, right? They're all good people. But there's a problem. If you teach history, you know what happens? Every year, I get 1 year older. And those damn kids, they're always between 17 and 22. What does the Second World War mean to them? Do you know that I have students, not only Union, Skidmore, that did not know what side Japan was on in World War II? Can you believe that? And when it comes to entertainers, unbelievable. In a class of 40, not one student had ever heard of the singer Carole King. Not one. I mean, in a Jewish history class, not one student out of 35 had ever heard the book, heard of Luria and Uris's book, Exodus, or seen the film, Exodus. That's the problem. High schools do a wonderful job in teaching mathematics and science, but not in history. Every generation has its own, let's say, important theme or important event. For 21st century students, the event is 9/11. Everything that existed, everything that happened before 9/11 means absolutely nothing to them. 9/11 is their frame of reference. That's their trauma. So when it comes to Germany, yeah, we are now, 2025 will be the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. It's unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. But for many of us, the fossils out there like me, for many of us, what are the events that shaped our lives? Even if we were young, the years after 1945 shaped our lives. The Second World War, the creation of the State of Israel, the Cold War. When I tell students that in the Golden Land of Brooklyn we had a duck under the desk, because we were afraid of a nuclear attack, they don't understand this. So growing new generations of Germans are beginning to say, enough is enough. We didn't kill the Jews, not people of our time, not our parents. They didn't kill the Jews. And some of their grandparents were too young for the war. So they're talking about great-grandparents who are already dead. They don't want to hear any more of this. But in answer to your question, Jeffrey, I think for some time to come, Germany will stand with Israel.
All right, we're slowly going to pivot towards Israel. We've got a couple questions that help us do that. We'll pivot through Russia. Barbara Pankin writes, "Hi, Barbara. Russia," she says, "Russia is massing troops along the Israel-Syrian border. What do you think?" And I'm going to throw another one out there with that. I didn't know anything about that, so hopefully you do. An anonymous attendee who writes in, "Do you imagine that Mr. Putin would intervene in defending Iran in the event of war between Iran and Israel or the United States?"
All right. First of all, Barbara, I must say, I have not heard about Russians massing troops in Syria on the Israeli border. What we have learned very recently is that the Russians have provided Hezbollah with some of the most sophisticated weapons in their arsenal. Anti-tank missiles, ground-to-air missiles, things like that. That we know. But the massing of troops, I have not heard that. The Russian relationship with Israel is a very tense one. So far, again, how can I say this without infuriating some of the people out there, Jeffrey? One of the things that Netanyahu has done well is to negotiate an arrangement with Putin. The arrangement is, you want to back Assad, we'll not stop. We will not attack Russians who are backing Assad in Syria. But you've got to allow us to attack those places in Syria that have become depots for Iranian weapons that are being shipped into Lebanon and into the Gaza Strip. And so far, it has worked. What will be in the future, I do not know. As for the second question, that's an important question. They're all good questions here. If the United States or Israel attacks Iran, what will the Russian reaction be? Now, that is such a good question that the answer is, among other things, that I am delighted to be a professor of history at Union College and not to be the President of the United States or the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State. It's easy for me to give you the answer. The answer, I believe, is, as of now, a strong Israeli and American attack or response to Iran, knocking out its nuclear infrastructure, will not elicit a Russian response. The Russians have their hands full in Ukraine. They're not going to get involved in something, and they'll give all the verbal support, and they may resupply Iran. But in terms of a Russian intervention, precipitating a war with the United States, I don't think that's the case.
All right, let's stick in the Middle East. We'll go to the north of Israel. Sandy Sadia would like to know how to establish a demilitarized zone north of Israel in southern Lebanon with a NATO or UNIFIL force actually maintaining a non-military area north to the Litani River. How will this prevent Hezbollah or others from simply extending the range of their missiles, technically now being done, so they can strike any facility inside Israel from further away? With the statement.
Mr. Sadia is making a good point. But remember, the real threat is not from the rockets. The Israelis can respond, and the day may come when the price is being paid is too high in Lebanon for Hezbollah. We are now told that 1,200,000 Lebanese have been displaced. Most of them are Shiites, but not all of them. There may come a time when Hezbollah is going to say, you know what? The Lebanese people are just not going to put up with this anymore. Not even our own Shiite population is going to put up with this. But I don't know whether that will be. I hope that time will come. But the real threat, Mr. Sadia, the real threat is a Lebanese replay of October 7th. The rockets are a problem. They really are a problem. I don't want to minimize that. But the real threat is the trauma of October 7th. When armed soldiers came across the Israeli border, they killed, they raped, they mutilated. That's the great Israeli fear. And so if Hezbollah can be pushed back north of the Litani River, and there is a NATO force in there, the chances are, the great chance are, that there will not be a repetition of Hezbollah forces storming into Israel, the northern part of Israel. But you're absolutely right. The rockets can be fired from far away, and the best that you can do there is to get the best anti-rocket defenses that you can have, better than Iron Dome, better than Arrow, better than all of these things. And then you got to play hardball. You got to begin to attack those areas from where the rockets are coming from. And even, again, forgive me for saying this, even some of those areas where the rockets are not coming from, to make it clear to the people of Lebanon and to Hezbollah that it's not open season on the Jews.
Professor Berk, as long as we're talking about Lebanon and, not to reopen the can of worms that you were talking about earlier with immigration and what's happening in Europe right now, but do you imagine that European leaders are looking at what happened in Lebanon, which was a majority Christian country, and kind of taking that and looking at what's happening in their country and wondering if they need to change policy, immigration policy specifically, to avoid something like that happening in mainland Europe?
Jeffrey, another good question. They're certainly thinking about that. That is the question. Do you allow more immigrants to come in? And the other question is, can we do a better job of integrating these people? In the United States, immigrants from all countries seem to be integrated much better. In Paris, for example, in the suburbs of Paris, there are whole areas, whole neighborhoods that are inhabited by Muslim immigrants They feel alienated from French society, and they become very hostile. They suffer a good deal of its discrimination, and of course, their reaction to the discrimination means that there's going to be even more discrimination. But again, I raised this issue that I raised, which is so delicate to raise. Is this the one group of immigrants that cannot be integrated into American society? Or let me put it another way, to be more precise. Is more Muslim immigration into our country, is it a threat to American Jews? Is it a threat? Will we see? I'm not saying I'm not waffling here. I'm just raising the issue here. And I'm telling you, this we know, what is being said in some of these mosques is absolutely incredible. What was said in Dearborn, for example, some of the stuff is incredible. You wouldn't believe it. This is the kind of stuff that you expect coming from these right-wing fanatics, these neo-Nazis, who talk about you got to do this to the Jews. What is happening in the Islamic world is, of course, you don't talk about Jews for the most part, you talk about Zionists. But keep in mind, in their mind, anybody who supports the state of Israel is a Zionist. So when a teacher at a good liberal arts college posts something that she didn't say, but somebody else said, but she posted it, you got to hunt them down like dogs. There's no place for Zionists in this college. That's not good stuff. So I don't know. We all go. We go to some of us go to Muslim doctors, and we're treated well here. The overwhelming majority of Muslims are not terrorists, and are not, who knows what they feel about Zionism in Israel. I suspect they're very hostile, but they don't move from that ideological hostility into physical assault. But some will. Some do, and some will. What do you do here?
Well, we're going to find out what happens in the next 4 years, because just as long as we're talking kind of immigration policy, of course, there's a very real possibility that when President Trump takes power, that we're looking at mass kicking people out. I can't think of the word.
Deportation.
Deportation. Thank you. But the question is, nobody really knows what that looks like, if that's even going to happen.
I think it would be catastrophic to engage in mass deportation. We're talking about the figure that is now for illegal immigrants in our country is 11 million. How are you going to deport 11 million people? But on the other hand, again, my own feeling is, again, we're all the children or grandchildren of immigrants. You cannot oppose immigration. And besides, not only is it a moral issue, it's a pragmatic issue. I mean, immigrants make our country great. They do. They really make America a better place. They bring different values. They strive harder. They have the immigrant advantage that they have to work harder than other people. That's good for American society. The question the American people have to ask is, you don't want to stop immigration. It's not good. It's not morally right, and it's not good for the country. But do you want open borders? Or do you want to, again, for me, I would increase the number of immigrants that come into our country, but I would make sure that these are immigrants that will not be a danger to our country. And it means, again, where the Biden administration, I think, fell down was, its policy was morally correct. That is allowing numbers of people to come in. They weren't vetted properly, and most significant of all, there was no uniform national policy to help those cities and towns that were integrating these people. So even here in Schenectady, in this relatively small city, there was an incident where a motel in which poor people were living, they were thrown out and immigrants were put in. And in New York City, again, I mean, President Trump did very well in New York City, better than any Republican has done in decades. And that's a question here because of, I think, a faulty policy of integrating these people. There should have been a general policy, a uniform policy, helping those communities that were taking in large numbers of immigrants. So I hope that will be done in the future.
A lot to, well, we're going to see. There's a lot to come in the next few months, that's for sure. Okay, sticking with domestic for a little bit, Vicky Nelson writes in, from your standpoint as a historian, can you comment on the push for recess appointments? Is this a first or a first for so many? Not sure exactly.
Uh, you know, I'm not a political scientist. I don't think it is the first example of this. The issue here is, and this is going to be a problem, is the quality of the appointments. That's really the issue. We are the leader of the world. We are the greatest nation on this planet. And we face, again, that world of shocks. You want to have the best people in there, whether they're conservatives or liberals. You want people of quality. And I must tell you, I tried to stay neutral on this stuff with President Trump, Kamala Harris, and so on. I try to stay neutral. But my own feeling is, and I think many people in the Senate, Republicans in the Senate, feel the same way, that some of the appointments that are being proposed, they're not the best. They're just not the best people. And you want, again, not about being a liberal or conservative. You want people with fine minds and good morals. That's what you want. We'll see.
We will see. All right, Professor Berk, we've got a couple other odds and ends in here, but pretty close to the end. A couple very nice thank yous. Peg Elephant says, best ever. Again and again, I say thank you. Leah Khanin writes in, Professor Berk, incredible talk. I went to Eastern Europe with you many years ago, and you are still a fabulous source of information and insight. Very kind. Question from Jane Joseph. We'll go back to Israel and then we'll wrap this up. Jane would like to know, if you're not able to go and volunteer in Israel in person, how can we best help Israel apart from monetary donations?
Not only you can help Israel in a variety of ways, even if you don't volunteer. You buy a hotel room, you become a tourist. The economy is shot to hell. Remember, it's a reserve army. So people, and now they've extended the amount of time that the reservists have to serve. By going to Israel, one, you provide moral support, and also you are providing, again, you're putting money into the economy, an economy that is suffering. And it's not only a question, if you stay in this country, of providing Israel with financial support. I have said this before. I even said it at Union College on a homecoming weekend. Every Jewish philanthropic dollar should go to Jewish causes in the state of Israel. This is not the time for universities and colleges. This is not the time for art museums or any museums whatsoever. This is the first and only Jewish state in 2,000 years, and it is literally and figuratively up against the wall. So, again, want to go to Israel? You can, as I've told you, this is the way you can support Israel, providing financial support, and not above all, but certainly also, is to provide Israel with a political support. To use the Hebrew, every supporter of Israel should be a shliach or shlicha. That is really to defend the state of Israel to our neighbors, to our politicians, and to make it clear where the guilt really is and what Israel stands for. It is the only democratic country in the Middle, the only true democratic country in the Middle East. And if you need anything, forgive me for spinning this out, Jeffrey. If you want to know what Israel has meant to us, it is the ultimate place of refuge for our people. Every Jewish man, woman, and child who wants to go to the state of Israel can do so. It is Silicon Valley East. This is a country of no more than 10 million people. Look what it has contributed in terms of computer technology, in terms of medicine, in terms of agriculture. It is also, again, I'll use the elegant language. In the old days, you used to say, it gives the Jewish people, it is a place that defends the interests of the Jewish people. Today, they would say, it gives the Jewish people agency. That's just a fancy way of saying that now the Jews can defend themselves. And if you want to get a good example of this, let me tell you, I'll give you the two dates. One is May 1943, and the other is July 4th, 1976. May 1943, 300 Orthodox rabbis go to the White House to speak to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, begging him to do something for the Jews in German-occupied Europe. They never get to meet Roosevelt. He doesn't listen to them. He's not concerned with that issue. July 4th, 1976, Israeli soldiers in Israeli planes land at the Entebbe airport and rescue Jewish captives. 200,000 Moroccan Jews, 1 million Soviet Jews, probably 100,000 by now Ethiopian Jews. How many times in history have Black people been taken out of Africa, not to slavery, but to freedom? That's what Israel means to us. And when all is said and done, again, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. Is it a country with flaws and blemishes? The answer is yes, just as our country has flaws and blemishes. But when you put it on balance, this is one of the great success stories in all of history. Our people have risen from nothing, and they've created a viable, a good state, a democratic state that serves the interests of its people and helps a good number of people throughout the planet.
Professor Berk, as you know, the majority of my family lives there, so I have a personal vested interest in the peace, that peace should come to the land of Israel. So we'll all join together and pray for the peace of Jerusalem, as they say. Thank you, as always, for sharing your insight into what is a bit of a tumultuous world right now. Professor Berk, we'll be back for another virtual program. We're talking about, we're getting all the details together for January. So keep an eye on your inbox. There will be a new virtual program coming in January. In the meantime, I'll share my screen for 1 second just to remind people that next week we've got session 3 of Scholar-Palooza. That's going to be Rabbi Menachem Creditor. It turns out, as Professor Berg was talking about, 80 years since the end of World War II, Rabbi Creditor is going to be leading a group to Germany next May. So if you're interested, you can find details about that on our website, ayelet.com. He will be speaking with us next week. So I hope you will all join us and tune in for that program. And until then, I wish you all a good week. Professor Berk, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Shalom and bracha. Peace and blessing to all of you. And thank you so much for tuning in. Have a good holiday, all of you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.